If you switched on the radio 25 years ago, you could have thrilled to the sound of Mrs. Dale's Diary or Music While You Work, not to mention two-way family favourites, Can You Hear Me in Munich, Jean, and other such immortal broadcasting lines. Well, that was the state of play until Radio Caroline came along, broadcasting non-stop pop music from a boat in international waters off the coast of Clacton. Although the pirate station quickly built up huge audiences, it also attracted equal amounts of criticism for its failure to pay royalties to artists, along with claims that it interfered with emergency radio frequencies. As a result, the government brought in legislation in 1967 to silence the pirates. Yet, in spite of laws prohibiting the supply of the vessel from the British mainland, Caroline this Easter weekend celebrates its 25th birthday. Today, we look at the station that paved the way for British pop radio as we know it today.
Caroline's beginning was as a direct result of me managing an artist called Georgie Fame, and at the time, and both EMI and Decca turned him down, and the only alternative was to start a label. But in order to start a label, you had to have a radio station to promote it, and then I kept getting back to a radio station, and that was the motivation for doing it.
Radio Caroline was originally based on the Mi Amigo, where many household names started their careers, including the BBC's Johnny Walker. Johnny, when you were working for Radio Caroline, what made it unique?
Well, there'd never been anything like it before. And I mean, there hasn't since, really. That was the beauty of it. And it's the only radio situation I've ever been in where, A, the bosses aren't around, they're in London, and if you do something a bit outrageous that they object to, there's nothing they can do about it. I mean, if you really went over the top, as I did one night at about 11 o'clock, they tried to hire a special boat to go out to Caroline to have me taken off. But fortunately, all the guys who sail the boats were in the pub at the time, so none of them fancied a late-night trip.
Before we go any further, what exactly did you do that night?
I was only trying to help the BBC, because I'd read Mrs. Dale's Diary was... the audience figures were suffering, you see. So I thought, well, if we put them on Caroline, A, we'll bring them to a whole new audience, and B, they'll all have been guilty of breaking the Marine Offences Act and liable to 2 years in jail. So I thought it'd be rather interesting. You know, I'm worried about Jim, he's in the nick. So I said it was by a special link with the BBC, and I just had a transistor radio with an earphone, and I just was listening to it in one ear and doing the show with the other. And then as soon as the Dales theme started, I said, now by special link with the BBC in London, Mrs. Dale's Diary, and just held this radio up against the mic. And the quality was great, it sounded beautiful.
Were there any special acts that Caroline championed?
You'd have to draw the list up of who we didn't. I remember the Animals' House of the Rising Sun was a 6-minute record, which the BBC, bless them, couldn't cope with, the idea of fitting a 6-minute single in Pick of the Pops. So the Animals definitely were helped a lot. The Rolling Stones were, the Moody Blues. Most of the bands who came through in the mid-60s will tell you that they owe it to the pirate stations.
Keep on running.
The 25 years before Caroline, British music didn't happen in the rest of the world to any great extent. It was mostly American music that was, you know, everything from Presley and all those other American rock and roll acts that were huge around the world. And then, of course, suddenly Caroline was on the air 24 hours a day.
All you were getting from the BBC on the light programme was about a couple of hours on a Saturday, with Brian Matthew reading a script. And at the same time, there was the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, the Animals, the Hollies, Herman's Hermits, all this wonderful music that was flooding out from everywhere in Britain. There was Carnaby Street. I mean, it literally was a youth revolution. You have to sort of put this all in the context of swinging London, the swinging 60s. It was just a wonderful time. People never worried about tomorrow. They were just having a good time. People would go down to Clacton like a mecca and sit on the beach with transistor radios. That was something that had only just come in. So all these things sort of, I think, were meant to be, because they all were different pieces of the jigsaw that all slotted in at the same time. And you could sit on the beach and see the boat. I used to get people drive down to the coast and flash their headlights at the ship, and I'd be out on the deck with a microphone. And using a code, I'd get into conversation with them and stuff. One night we lit up the whole coastline. The coastguards went crazy. I just stood on the deck and said, lights on, and the whole coast, as far as you can see, would just light up. Lights off, and everything went dark. Such a feeling of megalomania. I have to admit, I enjoyed it.
But the glory days came to an end when, in 1980, atrocious seas succeeded in doing what the government's Marine Offences Act had failed to do, sink Radio Caroline.
Watching the ships roll in, then I watch them roll away.
But 3 years later, Caroline was back with a new ship, the Ross Revenge, which today is still broadcasting non-stop pop music and chat. So I climbed on board in search of Caroline DJ Dave Asher.
Please, living in a box.
Dave, I crept up behind you there. Tell me what you were doing before you actually joined Radio Caroline.
I used to live in Israel, and I was working there for a station called The Voice of Peace, which is like this, it's on a ship. And I decided I'd had enough of that, so I thought I'd come back to England, and as things happened, come to work on another station on another ship. So.
Which looks pretty much like the last one, I dare say. What on earth makes you want to work on board a place like this where conditions are cramped, where you're without so many home comforts?
That's a good question. I'll go home now. No, it's different, isn't it? I mean, everybody has the chance to do maybe something once in their lifetime that's really different. So this is, I guess, my chance. You know, this is really different to anything else you'll ever try and do, so.
What are the major drawbacks for you, though, Dave, working in an environment like this?
I've been here since November, so this is like week 19 for me. And, well, I'd really like to go home, but I can't. I'm still here.
Anchored 17 miles off the Kent coast, home is a 1,000-ton trawler where living conditions are, to say the least, basic. The cabins are cramped and without windows, although the 3 crew and 9 DJs appear to eat well, taking it in turns to cook the main meal of the day. And there are enough supplies on board to last up to 3 months.
On the M4 motorway.
Caroline's programme controller is 24-year-old Steve Conway, who joined the station in order to read the news, which is plundered in true pirate tradition from the BBC's CFAX service.
In the early hours of the morning. The next news on Caroline 558 is this evening at 6 o'clock.
Many people see Radio Caroline as a pirate radio station. Just what is the legal status as far as you see it?
Well, I wouldn't really see it as a pirate station. We are outside the UK and we're outside any other European country by virtue of the fact we're in international waters. We are... The closest comparison to what Caroline is a satellite based on land. We're beaming in a signal from somewhere else. We're not illegal because there are no laws where we are.
What sort of contact do you have with the outside world? You seem so isolated here.
The only contact we have with the outside world is the occasional supply boat, which comes from outside Europe. And we see the ferries that go by. There's these enormous big Ullo Line ferries which go from Kent to Holland. And they're full of people. You see them go by and you look at it and you think, there goes 2 restaurants, a bar, a duty-free shop, and about 300 girls.
Why do you think Caroline's managed to stay afloat for 25 years? It's an awful long time.
Sheer dedication. There have been a number of times when we could have ended it in the last couple of years. For example, back in 1987 when our tower came down, so many people said to me, well, that's the end. But we came back out here, we built a new aerial system with our own bare hands because we were determined not to let it end there. And I think determination and human spirit is the key in Caroline's success.
But with more land-based pop stations available than ever before, is there still a role for Caroline?
I rather like the idea that it's still there. And I think and it's an incredible achievement that after all this time it is still there. But I've always passionately believed in the airways should be completely full. There shouldn't be any empty gaps. And there should be all sorts of music and all sorts of speech. I think it's rather nice that there's still this voice from the North Sea that's completely free. I think it's quite healthy.